When I opened my eyes, all I heard was the steady beep of machines and the soft hum of a sterile room. I'd survived an 11-hour heart transplant, 3 weeks in a medically induced coma, 3 weeks with no flowers, no calls, no familiar footsteps in the hallway, just cold light and silence. The first person I called was my daughter, Amara. My hands shook as I held the phone. My voice was weak, raspy. Amara, I made it through the surgery. I'm at St. Helene's recovery ward. She cut me off, her voice sharp over the sound of glasses clinking and music in the background. Mom, I'm in the middle of a business dinner. You're okay now, right? Let's talk tomorrow. The new heart in my chest kept beating, but something inside me cracked. 7 days later, the doctors discharged me. I refused rehab. I wanted to go home to the cedar-framed Victorian by the ocean, the house my ancestors built in the late 1800s, the house where I'd loved, raised my child, and buried my husband. The self-driving cab hummed up Maple Cliff Road. The sea air hit my face like a blessing until the car turned the final corner. A sleek, glowing sign stood proudly in my front yard. House with garden sold. Quinton Voss Holdings, LLC. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly along the rusted iron fence, each one labeled in neat black marker. Kitchen, books, personal Celeste. On the top box, a single handwritten note. Mom, we've handled everything. Your room at Serenity Haven is ready, don't worry. My stomach twisted. I tore open a box. Inside were Robert's photographs, my late husband. They were wrapped in packing tape like museum relics, cold, unfeeling. The smart lock on the front door no longer recognized my fingerprints. I had to use my emergency code. The moment I stepped inside, my chest tightened. The walls were bare, the living room stripped, the cherrywood dining table Robert built by hand gone, my bedroom gutted except for a lone mattress on the floor. On the kitchen door, a digital notice blinked. Property transfer, Monday 9:00 a.m. Please clear any remaining personal items. At the bottom, signed Declan Voss, managing partner, QV Holdings, LLC. Declan, my son-in-law, young, ambitious, a lawyer with that slick smile that always set off alarms in my gut. I stood there, gripping that notice, the surgical stitches in my chest pulling, but nothing compared to the pain blooming behind my ribs. While I lay unconscious on an operating table, my only child had sold our ancestral home. I called Amara. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. The third time Declan picked up, his voice smooth and detached like he was reciting a contract. Celeste, this was the logical decision. The house is too big. Serenity Haven is top tier. Everything's finalized. Please don't complicate things. He hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone. My hands were cold. I had trusted Amara with every legal document. After my retirement, it felt easier that way. And now, that trust had been weaponized against me. That night, I slept on the bare mattress in my hollowed-out bedroom. Outside, the ocean roared, but it didn't sound like home anymore. It sounded like a funeral drum. I placed a hand over my chest, over the heart that wasn't originally mine, and whispered to myself, Celeste Quinton, you survived once. Now you fight. The moonlight spilled across the empty floorboards, catching my reflection in the window. Not a frail woman fresh out of surgery, but someone who would take back everything, every brick, every document, every name on every deed. The morning after I discovered the sold sign, the coastal fog hung low over the cliffs, swallowing the house in a gray silence. I stood in the empty kitchen, holding Robert's coffee mug, the one with a chipped handle he refused to throw away, and realized something unsettling. This house was already gone. The walls weren't mine anymore. The locks had changed. My daughter had made that decision for me, but this wasn't the end. I packed what I could into 2 suitcases, family photos, legal documents, Robert's old compass, and a small cedar box containing the original stock certificates he'd bought back in the early days of biotech. Most people didn't know this, but those certificates represented a quiet fortune, one that Amara had no idea existed. Before noon, I called the only person I trusted without reservation, Mabel Sinclair, my oldest friend from medical school. She lived alone in a restored farmhouse in coastal Maine, a place so far off the grid that even drones had spotty service. When I told her what had happened, there was a long, dangerous pause on the other end of the line. "Pack your bags," she said. "I'll pick you up at the Portland terminal, and Celeste, don't you dare give up." Her voice steadied me in a way the hospital never could. That afternoon, I closed the door to my stripped-down house for the last time. The self-driving cab pulled away from the cliffs, and I didn't look back. Mabel greeted me at the station like a storm in a floral scarf, fierce, unapologetic, and already planning. She helped me settle into her guest room overlooking the rocky shore, then poured 2 cups of coffee so strong it could wake the dead. We sat across from each other at her kitchen table, and for the first time since the surgery, I told the entire story, every detail, from Amara's dismissive phone call to the digital transfer notice on my kitchen door. Mabel listened in silence. When I finished, she leaned forward, eyes sharp. "They underestimated you. That's their first mistake. Don't make it their last." She was right. For years, I'd trusted others, my husband to handle the finances, my daughter to manage the paperwork. But trust had made me complacent, and complacency had nearly cost me everything. The next day, I made 2 critical phone calls. The first was to Renee Park, a formidable elder law attorney in Boston with a reputation for dismantling financial abuse cases brick by brick. When I explained the situation, her tone shifted from professional to surgical. "If your signature was forged, we're not just talking civil litigation," she said. "We're talking federal fraud. Let's meet." The second call was to Walter Chambers, my financial advisor of 20 years, the only one who knew about the biotech investments Robert and I had tucked away decades ago. He was nearing retirement, but when he heard my voice, he cleared his calendar. "Celeste," he said gently, "I always told Robert that one day these shares would give you options. Looks like that day has arrived." I hadn't looked at those accounts in years. Robert had set them to reinvest automatically. While I'd been living modestly, the portfolio had grown quietly, relentlessly, into something formidable. I spent the next week at Mabel's farmhouse combing through decades of paperwork, closing joint accounts, securing legal documents, and shifting every asset I still controlled into a living trust with airtight protections. Amara's name was nowhere on it. Each signature I added to those new documents felt like a piece of my backbone knitting itself back together. One night, sitting by the fireplace with Mabel's dog curled at my feet, I stared out at the dark Atlantic and whispered a quiet promise to myself. They thought they'd cornered me, a recovering, aging widow who wouldn't fight back. They'd forgotten who raised Amara. They'd forgotten who built this life. They'd forgotten I wasn't done. The house may have been sold, but the real battle hadn't even begun. And this time I wouldn't be calling anyone for help. This time I'd be the one setting the terms. By the time spring rolled around, the biting Maine winds had softened, and so had I, but only on the outside. On the inside, I'd become sharper, colder, more deliberate. For months, I'd lived quietly in Mabel's farmhouse, rebuilding my life brick by brick. Every legal document was secured. Every asset was shielded. The living trust was airtight. If Amara and Declan ever tried to come for me again, they'd find nothing but walls made of iron and strategy. I hadn't planned to step into the public eye. That part happened almost by accident. It started with an email from the Morning Ledger, a national financial news show. A producer named Barbara Chen had heard through Walter about a retired doctor who'd quietly secured her independence after a major family betrayal. "We're doing a segment on financial empowerment for women over 60, she wrote. "Your story could inspire so many. Would you consider appearing?" My first instinct was to decline. I wasn't a public figure. I wasn't looking for attention, but something about the word empowerment tugged at me. I'd been humiliated privately. Maybe it was time to reclaim my story publicly on my own terms. I agreed. The studio was smaller than I imagined, bustling with producers and camera crews. Barbara greeted me warmly, walking me through the talking points. The host, Sophia Martinez, was poised, empathetic, and sharp. She made me feel safe, like this wouldn't be sensationalized. We discussed my background, my career in medicine, the sudden health crisis, the betrayal, and how I'd taken back control of my finances. I talked about living trusts, financial literacy, and why older women should never sign everything over. For convenience, it was going perfectly, until Sophia went off script. "Celeste," she said brightly, turning to the camera. "And what's truly inspiring is that her investment income now totals around $620,000 a year, proof that it's never too late to take control of your financial future." For a second, I couldn't breathe. That number was supposed to stay confidential. It was mentioned only in prep meetings. The cameras kept rolling. The segment ended smoothly. I smiled through it, signed some release forms, shook hands, and returned to my hotel. That night, as I sat by the window overlooking the city, my phone buzzed once, then again and again, text after text, call after call. Amara, Declan, unknown numbers. They'd seen the broadcast. By morning, my phone showed over 70 missed calls and nearly 50 messages. "Mom, please call us. Why didn't you tell us about that money? We need to talk, ASAP. This is getting out of hand." The irony wasn't lost on me. When I was on a hospital bed with a failing heart, they couldn't be bothered to pick up once. But the moment they heard about 6 figures a year, suddenly they remembered my number. I didn't respond. 2 days later, I was back in Maine, standing in Mabel's kitchen, pouring coffee as she scanned the morning headlines on her tablet. "Well," she said, raising an eyebrow, "looks like you're famous. Widow doctor turns financial powerhouse at 67, front page of the lifestyle section." I laughed, a low, unexpected sound. "Great, just what I needed." Mabel tapped the screen. "Fame might not be what you wanted, but it's exactly what they fear. You just changed the power dynamic." She was right. Amara and Declan had built their scheme on the assumption that I was weak, dependent, and too sentimental to fight back. Now the entire country knew I was neither. That evening, Barbara called again. The response to my segment was overwhelming, hundreds of women writing in with their own stories of financial betrayal and reclamation. She wanted me to return for a follow-up panel in a few weeks. I agreed again, this time with a smile. But the real turning point came not from television, but from my lawyer, Renee Park. She called me one afternoon, her voice measured but electric. "Celeste, we've uncovered something. It looks like Declan forged your signature on several key sale documents, and the notary listed retired 8 years ago. This isn't just morally wrong, this is criminal." I set my coffee cup down slowly. My hands were steady. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. "What are our options?" I asked. "Federal fraud charges," Renee said. "Or leverage. If you want justice without dragging this into a courtroom, this gives us serious negotiating power." For the first time since waking up from surgery, I felt stronger than the people who betrayed me. Not just financially. Legally, strategically, emotionally, the board had shifted. And this time I was the one holding the queen. For nearly a year, I'd kept my distance. I rebuilt my life, strengthened my defenses, and waited. I didn't chase Amara. I didn't call. I didn't explain. I let silence become its own kind of power. But after the TV segment aired, and after Renee's team uncovered the forged signatures, I knew it was time. Not to reconcile, to confront. I sent Amara a single message. Seaside Cafe. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. No emojis, no explanations, just terms. The cafe sat on a stretch of quiet Maine coastline, perched on a wooden deck that overlooked the Atlantic. I arrived early, choosing a corner table with a full view of the parking lot. The air smelled of salt and coffee, and the wind was sharp enough to keep away anyone who wasn't serious. When Amara's rental car pulled up, I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from clarity. She stepped out slowly, scanning the deck until her eyes found me. She looked older than I remembered, thinner, paler, and tired. The confidence she used to wear like a shield had cracks now. She hesitated before walking over. "Mom," her voice was cautious, almost fragile. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The waves crashed against the rocks below, steady and relentless. "You look good," she said finally. "Freedom agrees with me," I replied evenly. She winced, as if the words landed harder than I intended. Maybe they did. "I didn't come here to trade pleasantries," I continued. "You've been trying to reach me. Consider this your chance." She clasped her hands together, a nervous tic she'd had since childhood. "I saw your interview. Declan saw it too. We both realized we made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's a generous word for forging legal documents and selling my home while I was unconscious." Her face flushed. "I didn't know about the forgery, Declan." "Stop," I said sharply, holding up a hand. "This isn't about blaming your husband. This is about you. You signed off on everything. You packed my belongings. You left a note that said, 'Don't worry.'" She flinched like the memory burned. I leaned forward slightly. My voice stayed calm, but there was steel beneath it. "When I collapsed, I called you from the ambulance. You were at a dinner party. You told me to call tomorrow. I almost didn't make it through that night. And while I was lying on an operating table, fighting for my life, you were signing papers to erase mine." She opened her mouth, but no words came out, just a shaky breath. "Let's not pretend this is about love or protection," I continued. "This is about control, about convenience. And now that you've seen the truth about my finances, suddenly you're full of regret." Her eyes glistened. "It's not about the money." "Then what is it about Amara?" asked, my tone soft but relentless. "Because from where I'm sitting, you disappeared when I was weak and reappeared when I became useful." She looked away out at the ocean, gripping the edge of the table like it might keep her from falling. "We thought we were doing the right thing," she whispered. "The house was too big, you were alone, and Declan said." "Declan said," I echoed bitterly. "How convenient. Did you ever stop to ask what I wanted?" Silence. I let it hang there. Heavy, true. Finally, I set my coffee cup down and spoke with quiet precision. "Here's the situation. My lawyer has hard evidence that Declan forged my signature. The notary on the sale had been retired for 8 years. That's federal fraud, Amara. I can press charges. Declan will lose his license. You could face civil liability as a co-beneficiary. This isn't theory. This is reality." Her face drained of color. "Mom, please." "I'm not here to destroy you," I said, "but I'm also not here to pretend everything is fine. You betrayed me, and betrayal has consequences." She swallowed hard. "What are you going to do?" "I already have," I replied. "My assets are legally protected. You have no access to anything. As for the house, my attorney is preparing a settlement demand. Full market value for my share plus damages for emotional distress. You'll be hearing from her formally." Her shoulders slumped. The confident woman who once thought she could manage my life like a business transaction was gone. Sitting across from me was simply my daughter. Flawed, lost, but no longer holding the power. "Why did you come, really?" I asked quietly. Not the official reason, the real one. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Because when I saw you on that show, you looked happy, strong. I realized how badly I'd underestimated you, and I didn't want the last thing between us to be that note on the boxes. Her honesty caught me off guard. I took a slow breath, letting the wind fill the silence between us. "Trust isn't something you can buy back with a conversation, Amara," I said finally. "It's built slowly over time, and this time on my terms." She nodded, small and trembling. "I understand." I stood, signaling to the waitress for the check. "If you want to talk again, you text first. I'll decide. No surprises, no schemes." She whispered, "Okay." As I walked back toward my car, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free. For the first time in a long time, the weight was where it belonged, on her shoulders, not mine. The weeks that followed our meeting at Seaside Cafe were strangely quiet. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like isolation. It felt like space, room to breathe. Amara kept her word. She didn't ambush me with calls or emotional appeals. She texted, carefully and briefly, asking if I was ready to talk again. Sometimes I responded. Sometimes I didn't. The control, finally, was mine. Meanwhile, Renee moved swiftly. Her legal team sent a formal demand to Quinton Voss Holdings, full market value for my share of the property, plus compensation for emotional distress. Declan's attorneys didn't even try to fight. The evidence of forgery was airtight, and federal fraud charges were a very real possibility. Within weeks, a settlement was reached. I received my rightful share of the sale price and an additional $250,000 in damages. Declan quietly resigned from his firm to focus on family matters. I didn't celebrate with champagne. I signed the settlement papers with steady hands, placed them in a fireproof safe, and went for a walk by the sea. The house was gone. That part of my life was over. But the power I'd gained in the process, that was mine to keep. Barbara Chen called again. The response to my first TV segment had been overwhelming. "Celeste, viewers loved you. We want to do a follow-up panel on financial independence after betrayal, especially for older women. You'd be perfect." I hesitated at first, but then I thought about the hundreds of messages I'd received from women who saw themselves in my story. Women who'd been sidelined, silenced, or signed away their security to people who didn't deserve it. I said yes. This time, walking onto that set, I didn't feel nervous. I felt grounded. The lights weren't blinding anymore. The questions didn't shake me. I spoke calmly, openly about legal protections, financial education, and boundaries. When Sophia asked about forgiveness, I didn't give a fairy tale answer. "Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the hurt never happened," I said. "It means choosing not to let the betrayal define you. It means holding people accountable, including yourself, and deciding, on your terms, what comes next." The segment struck a chord, not because I was extraordinary, but because I was real. By the end of summer, I purchased a small waterfront cottage near Mabel's. It wasn't grand like my old home, but it was mine entirely, legally, emotionally mine. I filled it with books, soft rugs, and framed photographs I'd salvaged from the boxes. I built a little herb garden outside the kitchen window. Some mornings, I'd wake up early, wrap myself in a sweater, and watch the sunrise with a cup of strong coffee. The quiet no longer frightened me. It felt earned. Then, one afternoon, Amara texted, "I'm in town, could we meet for coffee?" I stared at the message for a long time. My first instinct was to say no, but something softer tugged at me, not weakness, not nostalgia, just possibility. I agreed. We met at a small cafe by the harbor. She looked different. Not polished and sharp like before, but humbled. Human. She told me she and Declan had separated. She'd left his firm, moved out of their glass and steel condo, and was working at a local community housing organization. For once, she didn't try to justify the past. She didn't ask for money. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She simply said, "I want to do better. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I want a chance to try." I listened. I didn't rush to fill the silence. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. "Trust isn't a switch, Amara. It's built. Slowly. And this time it happens on my terms. If you're serious, you'll prove it with actions, not apologies." She nodded. There were tears in her eyes, but not manipulative ones, just the raw kind that come from finally facing yourself. That night, back at my cottage, I sat on the porch with Mabel. The sun was sinking into the horizon, painting the sky in soft gold and peach. "Well," Mabel said, handing me a glass of wine. "Looks like you've turned the page." I smiled. "No, I wrote a new chapter." The waves rolled in, steady and familiar. I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the legal battles, the media storm, the confrontation, the settlement, the cautious rebuilding. I wasn't the woman who left the hospital a year ago, scared, betrayed, alone. I was a woman who survived, who strategized, who stood her ground. I'd lost a house, but I'd gained something far greater: clarity, independence, and a future entirely of my own making. When I turned off my phone for the night, the last thing I saw was a message from Barbara. "The segment hit 3 million views. Women are sharing their stories because of you." I set the phone aside, leaned back in my chair, and let the ocean wind wash over me. Home wasn't about walls or deeds. It was about standing on solid ground, the kind no one could ever sell out from under me again.